Good evening. Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources that we hope will help improve your life. I'm Stu Reed. Here's my co-host, Dave Burstein. Hey, Dave.
Hello.
And today we have a very special guest, Jerome D. Greco, a public defender in the Digital Forensics Unit of the Legal Aid Society in New York. Jerome works with attorneys and investigators in all 5 boroughs on issues involving electronic surveillance technology, cell phone tracking, GPS, social media, and hard drive analysis, among other fields. Mr. Greco is currently engaged in challenging the NYPD's use of facial recognition, ShotSpotter, and the execution of overbroad search warrants for electronic devices. Jerome, welcome to Community and Technology.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me.
Yes, our pleasure. Our pleasure. You shared with us prior to the show a fascinating recent study called Mass Extractions: The Widespread Power of U.S. Law Enforcement to Search Mobile Phones. And you were quoted in reaction to that study saying in the press recently, and I quote you, "We talk about the sanctity of the home, but there's so much more on your phone that gives a deeper and more intimate view than probably anything in your house." So tell us about that, Jerome. What is this forensic tool? How does it work? And how does it provide what, quoting from the study again, a window into the soul? All of that from the cell phone. Tell us about it.
Sure. So, there's a growing industry, digital forensics, that's more and more focusing on mobile devices and social media and cloud storage. And unlike, your home, these things store so much that you don't intend to. And also store things that even if you intend for it to be stored, you would probably never just have hanging around your house. There's companies out there that, like some of the bigger ones, Celebrite and Magnet and Gray Key, are selling these devices and tools to law enforcement around the world and military and intelligence around the world. They're also selling it to commercial people, Fortune 500 companies, and they also will sell it to people like me. The obvious difference between me and those others is that we're doing it with our clients' permission and to help them in their cases, versus trying to prosecute them and doing it against their wishes. But just think about it this way. When you walk out of your home, right, and you go on a trip somewhere, you go to the corner store, your home doesn't keep a record of the fact that you did that. Your phone does, right? Your phone is going to keep a record of your location throughout that entire trip if you keep your phone on you, which the vast majority of adult Americans do, and now even a large number of teenagers. And that information is now being kept. And so now you're figuring out where somebody is at any given moment in time. I think there was a quote from the US Supreme Court years ago when they first said a search warrant was required to search a phone, that was quoting a Pew Research study that at that point, 12% of people kept the phone with them even when they were showering. And so, and I imagine that's gone up quite a bit since then, especially with the improvements in the waterproofing of phones. And so these things are with you all the time and are keeping track of all your locations. But then not only just that, think about the amount of communications you have on the device that you wouldn't just have in your home, right? Communications with a partner, boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse, mistress, whatever, right? You're going to have these text messages, right? Emails, things like that, where, okay, yes, you could have written things to each other that you may keep in your home, but how many people have hundreds, thousands of love letters that have deep detail that they just keep hanging out in their house, right? Probably very, very few people, if anyone, right? And that was even true pre the existence of cell phones, right? Think about the number of intimate photos you may have. And when I say intimate, yes, that may include nude, naked photos, but also may just be you with friends and family, right? That, just the ease in which you could take a picture now means there is a lot more pictures, right? There was a time where, you had to have photos developed. And so that took money and time and effort that, people reserved generally for special occasions, parties and things like that. And then, banking information, right? How many people have banking credit cards and that information on their phones, or medical information, reminders to take your medication, or even people doing telehealth now, right? Having appointments with their doctors over their phones or other devices. All these things, plus much more, could be on there. And some of it, even if you delete it, depending on your phone, the operating system, and what you delete, it still may be recovered, right? And these are the things that people are aware of. The things that sometimes is this you may not even be familiar with or know is on the phone, just amplifies this problem, right? And then we give law enforcement the ability to just go through it, right, and invade your life in a way that even if they were to storm your apartment, they wouldn't be able to get that level of information on you, right? Who keeps a list of their friends in their apartment, right? At this point, I mean, people used to have address books. I think there's very few people who do that anymore. By comparison, Rolodexes and address books were the thing, but that you didn't have connected to that entry in your address book. Well, here's all the person's messages with you that they've ever talked to. Here's all the times you've ever called them, right? And so maybe had their phone number, maybe an address, but it didn't automatically connect to every time you've ever had a conversation with
them. Wow. So tell us, Jerome, about the tool. How does law enforcement extract the data, and do they get it all out? What tools are they using? Is this some new technology?
So it's been a technology that's kind of been developing over the last 20 years, really since cell phones started becoming smartphones, right? And Celebrate is probably the biggest player in this field, the company. And the devices that they have generally is you would connect the phone to the device, and it is copying, essentially imaging the phone and making it so that the copy of the data can then be searched and cataloged and reviewed in very quick ways. And just to give you an idea, because we're talking about vast amounts of data, right? Especially for people who are frequent users of phones or have them for long periods of time. These tools are, when they're producing the output, right, that copy, they're also producing, they also have programs that will open it and will automatically parse out different categories. So there'll be a category for pictures, there'll be a category for messages, for location data. And then in those categories, there's ways to filter, right? And so I could say, okay, I want all the pictures that are from this date, or I want all the pictures that have location data attached to them, right? And then it'll filter that and just show me what I'm looking for. And so it could go, if you have 10,000 photos on your phone, but only 100 of them have location data, I only asked for that. I've now just narrowed it down to 100 in a matter of seconds, right? And I can pull all of that off. And so what they're doing is essentially using your phone against you to be able to pull this data off, right? Because phones were meant to be able to interchange data, right? They're meant to be able to connect to your computer, especially older phones. And they're using that, they're exploiting that. And depending on what kind of phone you have will often depend on what can be pulled off. And the thing people always say, well, okay, well, my phone's password locked. Well, that may not be enough. A lot of these tools break passwords or get around passwords, right? They may not even need to figure out the password, they can get around it. That's becoming more difficult, they would say, because the phone companies, Apple, Samsung, Google, are probably the three biggest in the US, are pushing back on that, right? To some extent, they're trying to make their phones more secure, make it more difficult to do that. But it's a cat and mouse game, right? Every time they figure out a way to make their phone more secure, the digital forensic companies figure out a way to get around it or to break through it. And so it's a little bit like professional hacking in a way.
So how widespread is the use of these tools in law enforcement in the U.S.?
Incredibly widespread. The thing people used to claim, they would say, well, this is only, most law enforcement agencies don't have the money for these things, and this mass extraction report gave some hard numbers to it, where it shows that it is extremely common for even smaller law enforcement agencies to have, right? And when I say agencies, it could be your local sheriff or your local police department. And yeah, of course, they may not have the same level that, say, the NYPD or LAPD has. They may not have that same funding, but they also don't need that same funding because they're not covering, a city of millions of people, right? And so they can have one device, and if there's 10,000 people in your town, that may be enough, right, for them. And then at the same time, federal agencies and some of these larger, county and state agencies are sharing the resources, right? And so even if, let's say, your local police department doesn't have one of these devices, they may be able to send it to your state police, right? Or, if it's serious enough and important enough, the feds may be willing to do it. And that is absolutely what we're seeing happen. And for a lot of this, there's just not a lot of regulation. And we're kind of seeing police departments, so they'll get a search warrant often, although sometimes they'll coerce consent. But it's not enough just to get the search warrant, because there should be so many more limitations than there.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question about search warrants. You said sometimes they coerce. How does that work? Do they just seize the phone, or one of the things I read in the report that you shared is that often they use these searches for very mundane crimes.
Yeah.
And so how does that work? Do they just take the phones, or what's the process?
So, I mean, it varies across the country, but for the most part, if you're placed under arrest for a crime, and as you pointed out, it could be something as simple as shoplifting all the way up to homicide, right? And they're generally not restricting the seriousness for them to use this. When you're in custody, police generally take everything out of your pockets and they put it for safekeeping, right? And they're supposed to give it back. They often are not giving back the phones, and they're often trying to get search warrants to get into the phones, or try to convince you to consent or coerce you to consent, similar to trying to coerce you to give statements, right, or to waive your right to an attorney. And I think part of the problem is that there are plenty of people who even aren't necessarily being coerced in the sense they're not being threatened or anything like that, who will give consent because they don't actually fully understand what they're consenting to. Right. And they say, well, I'm being charged with this crime. I know I didn't do that. That's not going to be on my phone. It's like, okay, well, maybe that's not, but you got any pictures of you and your friends, smoking a joint? Yeah. You have any pictures of you doing something that you shouldn't do, right? And especially younger people, like, the idea of, I think of the idea of if these type of phones existed when I was in high school, the stupid things that people did would have been on pictures and videos,
right?
On everyone's phone, and we see that, right? And so you may not think, okay, I'm being charged with this crime, I'll consent and search my phone, not realizing just how much you're consenting to, and then until it's too late, right? Or even if, like, you end up say you're squeaky clean, right? Which nobody is, but let's just say hypothetically, right? You're squeaky clean, they find nothing. They've just gone through your life, right? Like, it's invasive. It's like a violation, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't realize that that's exactly what they're doing, right? You may think, oh, they're only interested in, my phone call records or something like that. And it's like, well, did they agree to only go into your phone call records, right? When you consented to the search, that paper you signed didn't say only for this, only for that, right? It should search my phone. It's okay. And so I don't think people realize what they're doing a lot of times when they actually.
Talk to us a little bit about something I read in the report again about plain view exception for digital searches. What is a plain view search, and how does that apply to what we're talking about here?
Sure. So traditionally, pre-electronic devices or not electronic devices, if the police were searching for something and they had authority to search where they were searching, they didn't have to ignore other evidence of crime. So for example, if you were searching a home for a weapon in a homicide case, right? And you had authority and search warrant to search throughout the home and the person's bedroom. And when you're searching through their bedroom, you find a kilo of coke. You don't have to pretend you didn't see that, right? Or if you were walking through, their home to get to the place that you're allowed to search, if on the table, let's say on the kitchen table, there's evidence of scales and cocaine or heroin, right? But you're going for the gun that you think is in the bedroom. You didn't have to ignore that. It was in plain view, right? You didn't do anything to search for it. It just was there. But this idea in the digital context really doesn't hold up the same way, because in the digital context, it's not really plain view, because you're going through everything, right? And you can limit which categories of information you're looking through without having to go through another category, right? And so say I'm interested, say I have authority, I have probable cause to look at text messages. Okay, then why'd you look at the photos, right? You didn't have to look at the photos in order to get to the text messages, but they will say, well, it was in plain view, right? Because I can see everything on the phone. And you're like, yes, but you don't have to. You could choose not to look at everything. You're choosing to do so. And by doing so, the warrant is overbroad, right? Or your execution of the warrant is overbroad. And so this idea that plain view should ever really apply in electronic data or digital data is just flawed for the most part. And it's, we see this, and that is like as an excuse to find something, right? And part of this problem is that the way most of these tools work, they're not keeping a record of what gets looked at and in what order and what you clicked on, right? And so it's sometimes hard to know exactly what they were looking at the time they found something. And so this idea like, oh, it was plain view. Well, how did you get to that, right? How did it appear on your screen? Mm-hmm. Is it through plain view, right? It's not the same thing as you walking to the bedroom and there's Coke on the table. Mm-hmm. It's not the same thing. And so it's a really flawed concept that existed, unrelated to digital data, that now they're trying to apply to digital data, which is kind of part of a broader problem. Yes.
Hey, Dave.
Yeah, your day job gives you a lot of experience what the police do. Why don't you talk about what you do and then give us a few examples of searches and other problems that you've come across, being careful not to give information you shouldn't.
Sure. So as a supervising attorney for the digital forensic unit, our unit consists of both lawyers and analysts and examiners. The analysts and examiners are trained, digital forensics majors, also have certifications and different tools. And so, we're split between using our services to help our clients, right, by trying to prove something, right, or try to find a flaw in what the government's doing, and then also fighting directly against what they're doing to try to get the courts to, one, understand what this actually means, and two, to actually try to rein this in, right? To try to controvert a motion, to write a motion to controvert for, say, a search warrant, and say that this shouldn't be allowed to be used, this was overbroad, or they didn't have probable cause, right? And so this shouldn't be allowed to be used against them. And so, as examples, right? We just one that always stands out to me because it just seems so obviously wrong. That our client got in a fight at a bar. Both he and the other person get arrested. It turned into a little bit of a broader fight, but the two of them get in a fight at the bar. They both get arrested. They don't know each other. They've never met each other before. They get this fight. They both get arrested at the scene, and the police get a search warrant for his phone. What evidence of a random bar fight is going to be on his phone, right? What possibility could you could that be, right? But some judge signed that, right? Agreed to that. And like many of the judges, they either don't understand, don't care, or just are willing to sign whatever DAs put in front of them. I'll refrain from stating specifically what my opinion is of this situation. But we were able to successfully controvert that, because there was stuff on the phone that was not related to the fight, but was not good for our client, including drug-related activity, right? And that was going to be charged with, that he was charged with as a result of this. And so being able to suppress that evidence, made a significant difference in his case. And so, but not only for us were we able to do that on the legal side, we were able to review the actual data that they had, right? We were able to use our tools and our experience to see exactly what they were looking at, exactly what they did, how much they pulled off, and what was actually on the device. And so that's, was very helpful for us to be able to advise that. Especially, there's a long held belief that, with some truth in it, that public defenders, right, are not be able to help their clients as much as, say, somebody who's hired. And I generally disagree with that. But one part of that I agree has often happened is that public defenders are generally underfunded, right, and understaffed, and very rarely have this level of resources. And so for us to be able to do that for our clients, even when it's something that turns out that's not great for them, but just be able to give them that resource and that opportunity, it makes them at least feel like that somebody's fighting for them, right? And that this extremely powerful system that would be happy to steamroll over them is going to have somebody standing between them, right, to some extent. And I think that's always been true for public defenders, but I think this just gives us another tool in that arsenal of that. To give an example of somebody where we've helped using one of our tools, we had a client who was charged with grand larceny, had no record, and he supposedly had stolen money from his company. He had taken money that he wasn't supposed to take. Our client said to us, "My boss told me to get that money, and I gave him the money." The boss, of course, denied this. He's saying our client stole it. Apparently, these text messages existed on our client's now broken phone. Phone is in pieces, literally. We bought the same model phone, swapped out the parts, got the phone working, connected it, and we're actually able to pull not only his text messages, but deleted messages, things that he had deleted that proved his story, that he had gotten these messages from his boss, right? The phone company doesn't have these messages anymore. His boss, if he had any level of intelligence, deleted his own, right? Because he's putting the blame on our client. And this was really the last possible place. And we were able to get those messages. And without having to turn over his phone to law enforcement to be able to go through everything and to take apart his life and possibly, if there's something bad in there, use it against him in some way. And that obviously that benefited him greatly, getting his case dismissed. Otherwise, it would have just been his word versus his boss with no record.
How'd you do that, Jerome? Did you use the same mass extraction technology that law enforcement uses? How did you get that data?
Yeah, and so we have some of these same tools from Celebrite and Magnet, and in this case, it was a Celebrite UFED Touch 2 tool. Again, the major difference for us is we're doing it with the person's consent, and we are informing them what that consent means, and we're doing it for their benefit, right? And there's still the privilege there, the attorney-client privilege that exists, right? And so yeah, we use these same tools for their benefit, right? And at the same time, not only being able to use those tools, but when law enforcement says this is how something works or this isn't how something works, we can very easily push back on that and say, well, I have the same device you have. I know how it works. Here, I'll press the buttons. And I know that's not it doesn't work the way you're saying it works. Or there's part of this that you're leaving out. And, you'd be surprised, or maybe not, how often the story changes, right? All of a sudden, oh yeah, okay, I guess yeah, I guess that's true, or this maybe does work this way, and you're like, yeah, okay. But if we hadn't been able to do that, you would have kept going with your version of the events, right, or your version of how this works. And so, yeah, we have access, not all the same tools, but a number of them. I wish we had a fraction of the budget that the NYPD or the DA's offices have for it, but we make good use of what we got.
Okay, we're going to take a quick musical break here. This is Community and Technology on WHCR 90.3, the voice of Harlem. We're speaking with Jerome Greco, a public defender in the Digital Forensic Unit of the Legal Aid Society in New York City. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back. Community and Technology, Stu Reed, Dave Burstein, and special guest, Jerome Greco, public defender and digital in the digital forensic unit of the Legal Aid Society in New York. We're just listening to a quick break with Lovely Is Today by Eddie Harris, his Plug Me In album. Before the break, we were talking about the recent report, Mass Extractions, the widespread power of U.S. law enforcement to search mobile phones, and just the incredible amount of data that is on mobile phones and how law enforcement is using that in many ways that are probably inappropriate. One of the questions I had for you, Jerome, is what happens to the data once the police do this search, whether it's legal or not, whether it's appropriate or not? What happens with the data that they extract? Is there any regulation or procedural rules around that?
So it's very little. It varies across the country and agency to agency. Some agencies do have some policies in place. Many do not, or have completely inadequate policies. Most states do not have any specific regulations about it. New York being one of them does not say, oh, this has to be destroyed after trial, or it can't be used in any other way, or you can't combine the data and cross-reference it. Those rules don't exist currently, and it just increases the problem, because it basically law enforcement is just able to gather more and more data from more and more people, which you can then start making connections between people, right? And so if you were to go into a public housing building and were to get search warrants for all those people's phones, right? And this is a hypothetical, obviously, and you were to start to take all the data and combine it together, you will be able to figure out a lot about people, who's connected to who talks to who has a relationship with who's cheating on who, right? And all that information, right, that could be used, I guess, in some ways for legitimate investigations, but that's not a world I want to live in, where, even with legitimate purposes, that there's just this unregulated ability to hold on to data and use it in whatever way law enforcement it finds it suitable. It should be held accountable to the people, and the people should be making those determinations. And kind of as I was discussing earlier, most people don't even know the level of problem, no less the ability to address it. And of course, our law enforcement community has not been responsive to the people who they're policing at all, and even much more obvious ways than cell phone problems. And so I don't have a lot of faith in law enforcement being able to regulate itself, and they've proven for a long time now that that's not a possibility. Mm-hmm. And so this is really something that the legislatures need to step in and the courts need to step in.
Mm-hmm. Do you see a disproportionate impact of these kind of searches on communities of color? I know we're disproportionately policed in general, yeah, but relative to these types of searches, what do you see the impact on communities of color?
Yeah, so I think prejudices and biases that exist in other aspects of policing are definitely present here. And so while people of color are generally are more likely to be arrested, especially for trivial things that people who look like me, white people, right, are not. And so they're more likely to have their phone seized. They're more likely for it to be held. They're more likely for it to be searched. I also generally have seen, a large percentage of our clients are young people of color, usually particularly young men of color, right? And they're the amount of information that courts have been finding is acceptable for probable cause, or the way it's justified, it doesn't seem like that's being done to everyone else, right? And this particularly for young people, right? They use the most flimsiest of excuses, right? Everybody who lives in a particular neighborhood is apparently a gang banger, right? Everybody who's ever been near a corner that a drug has been sold is now apparently a drug dealer. And so we're definitely, I definitely see that in our practice, that the abuse is disproportionate, and particularly for young people. And I think the invasion of the privacy is also higher for young people because they are so reliant on their devices. They're so reliant on their phones more than their parents and their grandparents. And so it's troubling to say the least. And it's not surprising though, unfortunately.
Yeah, you hit on a point. One of the things that we know, and Dave knows this well as well, so many young folks of color or lower income, the cell phone is their only connection to the internet. They don't have a computer, they don't have a tablet, so all of their activities occur over the cell phone. So there's so much data that's there that's way beyond just phone traffic and text messaging traffic.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
So
a large percentage of my clients, that is their device, right? There's not like I'll use my laptop, or that's their device. That is, that's what they can afford and that's what they need, and so that's what they use.
So you talk about public awareness of the problem with the mass extraction and law enforcement use of it. What kinds of policies would you recommend? What do folks need to do? What kind of things do we need to be advocating for?
So, I think there should be a couple things. One, there should be limitations on the type of investigations that these should be used on, right? And so while, yes, maybe you have probable cause in a shoplift case to search the phone, but is that really what we should be using it for, right? Okay, we get it, homicides, terrorism, right? The things they like to scare everybody with, child sexual abuse. Okay, people get that, right? There's a balance there of the invasion of privacy for the need of the seriousness of the crime. But okay, so why don't we limit it to serious crimes, right? And yeah, okay, maybe there is evidence of this lower level crime on there, like drug possession, right? But it seems like that's unnecessary, right? It's an extreme action to take in order to get evidence on something that's so trivial or so low level. So I think that's one easy thing is to say we should limit it to these extreme serious issues, serious crimes, right? I endorse for the most part the suggestion. So mass extraction was written by a group called Upturn, and I endorse their one of their suggestions about basically banning consent searches for phones. The only thing I slightly would think of different is I do think if somebody should be provided an attorney before making that decision, and their attorney should be helping them make that decision, because there are times where it may benefit the person, but I don't think the police should be the one advising them whether or not it's benefiting them. And I think somebody who's actually advocating on their behalf, who's legally and ethically required to help them, should be helping make that decision. And the vast majority of the time, we're going to say to you, it's not a good idea, don't do it, right? But the small percentage, you should have that option. I think these tools should come with built-in audit trails, right? That catalog and keep track of the actions that the person reviewing the data takes automatically, right? And in a way that they can't edit, right? So when they say, oh, we only looked at this or only looked at that, you could say, well, this trail says otherwise, or yes, that's consistent with what the trail says, right? Then that should be turned over in discovery. I also think we should be pushing, so these are, things that the legislators could do, right? But we should also be pushing our judges. It is fascinating just how willing judges are to sign these things, right? Sign search warrants in general. And we see that more and more that it's just like a routine thing that they don't put a lot of thought into or a lot of information in. And so I think our judges need to be better educated at this and also to be held accountable for it. One of the things that I also think the legislature should do is right now in New York, right? So a Manhattan DA, right, ADA can walk in to Manhattan courthouse, right? The New York City Criminal Court at 100 Center Street, and get any judge, pretty much any judge can issue the search warrant, right? It doesn't have to be the judge presiding over a case. It doesn't have to be a designated judge. It could be any judge, right? And that's what the law says. And so who do you think they choose? They choose the judges they know are going to issue it, right? And basically there becomes this pattern of they figure out which judges are least likely to push back on them, more likely to issue it, and they go to those judges. This is something that is not true for every jurisdiction. This is a New York thing, and that's something that needs to be changed. Another thing is that there has to be a way for the data, for you to be able to get the data destroyed, right, or returned, right, that they just can't hold on to it forever and use it in whatever way they want. There needs to be a way for an actual mechanism to do that, which doesn't really exist right now. And then I think the process right now, which the NYPD basically just takes everyone's phone, right? If you get arrested, they just take your phone and refuse to give it back for the vast majority of times, whether or not there's a legitimate reason to hold on to it, whether or not they really believe there's evidence on it. And I think there needs to be a change in that. And look, I don't trust the NYPD to ever do the change themselves. And so there needs to be a law in place, because right now the way to demand your property back takes too long, it's antiquated, and it rarely works. And so you get arrested and they take your phone. It's like that, your phone's gone. And as we just said, for a lot of people, that's their life, right? That is their form of communication with everyone else, family members, friends, right? The number of clients we've had where they're like, they're getting released from the courthouse after being arrested, but they're not gonna be able to get their phone back. And they say, well, like, that's my job is gonna call me, right? My babysitter or my kid is gonna call me. Like, what am I supposed to do? And we have to have that terrible, hard conversation with them. And it's not right. It's not right. People are incredibly dependent upon these devices, and there's good and bad in that, that double-edged sword there. But it shouldn't be the NYPD or the police determining whether or not they should get it back, or when they get it back. And they definitely have been abusing that.
So focusing on New York City, Jerome, is there any proposed legislation? Are any legislators talking about this?
I don't know on the New York City level. There has been discussion, I know, at the New York State level, which of course would apply to New York City, about changing our search warrant statutes, right, or developing a new one, because the New York State search warrant statute was pretty much very little change since the early 70s. And so it clearly was never designed for modern life, right? Nobody in 1970 thought about cell phones and the internet, unless you were a true visionary, maybe if you're working on ARPANET or something, right? So they're just antiquated. And so there has been discussion at the state level for that. It hasn't gotten where it should be. I know there is some discussion at the city level about the return of devices and trying to fix that process. But I would encourage people to call your council members, call your state senators and assembly members and say, this is the problem, make them care about it, right? Because the reality is politicians have a million things to care about, and unless they're hearing about a particular thing, they're going to focus on the other things. And so, if this is important to you, which I hope it is for people listening, tell them, I'm your constituent, you're the representative from my area, this matters to me, like, you should do something.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we got about 5 minutes left. Dave, you want to chime in with any questions for Jerome? Got to unmute yourself, Dave, please. Okay, Dave is unmuting himself, and he'll be right with us. Dave, okay.
Sorry, I was trying not to have background noise. I always like to get concrete details that really bring things home. So why don't we take the time that we have and ask you to describe a few cases that you've actually experienced where things could have been done better?
Could have been done better in terms of doing the search at all, or
Whatever comes to your mind. You're the guy, you're the expert. You're the guy who's doing this every day.
right. Okay. So, I gave the example earlier about the bar fight, right? And I think that was a perfect example of where the search should never occurred at all, and that person should have got their phone back. I can think of an example where not too long ago, where a client was arrested for a minor shoplifting incident, a misdemeanor shoplift, and they refused to give his phone back to him. Demanded the phone back. DA wouldn't give it back. Police won't release it without the DA's consent to release it, which is always a problem. And the reality is they believed, based on what I think is false information, that our client was involved in gang activity. And so the real reason for wanting to get into his phone was to try to prove that he was involved in gang activity and get intelligence on that, and also to maybe prosecute him for more serious crimes than shoplifting. Their basis for a lot of these things, as a lot of the gang designations are, really come from often trivial things, which are the neighborhood you live in, whether or not you've ever had any interactions with somebody that is a known gang member, which itself is a problem. And what we kind of basically figured out is that our client was friends or followers of people on social media who were known gang members. But the reality is that, yes, maybe, whether or not those people are actual gang members, I can't say. But our client wasn't following them or friends with them because of that. He was following their friends with them because they go to school together, right? They live in the same neighborhood, right? And it was unrelated to any sort of gang activity. It's just a person who lives down the block from them that they both have grown up there, right? And they refused to give back the phone during this entire time. Person deprived of the phone. Of course, parents are like, we can't buy you a new phone. We don't have the money for that, right? And it really hindered their ability to interact with people and their parents, right? They eventually searched the phone, and as suspected, they didn't find anything of gang activity or even of this minor shoplifting. But they invaded his entire personal life, right, to do that. And there was no reason for that. It's just based on BS. Another example we've seen, and this comes up not only with female clients, but I think more so with female clients, is that, they're naked pictures of themselves sometimes, right? And I think, a lot of the times it's not as if the police department goes, oh, this is a woman's phone, so I'm gonna have a woman look at it. Or even if that's true, if that wouldn't also be invasive to them, right? And so, you're a 19-year-old woman who sent a naked picture to your boyfriend, right? And you're okay with the boyfriend having it, but you don't necessarily want the NYPD to be keeping a copy of it and looking at it. And so even if, let's assume that you've done something wrong, right? And we've had situations where the person ended up being convicted or pled guilty. There was no reason for them to be able to hold on to all that data that was unrelated to the case, right? Including intimate photos, right? And so that's another example of a problem, right? And where that's happened. We also see, going back to the gang thing, the misinterpretation of what somebody posts on social media, what young people post and what's a joke. I grew up in northern New Jersey in the suburbs. If social media was a thing when I was a kid, half my friends would have been posting, Godfather quotes and Sopranos quotes and mob quotes because they all thought they were future mobsters. So surprise, kids growing up in the Polo Grounds or in other neighborhoods in the city post things related to media that they watch or songs that they know, and now that's being used as a basis to say, oh, this person's a gang member, right? And we need to get access to their devices or their data. And it's, one part of you wants to say to clients, right, like, you can't do this, right? Like you're being targeted for this, right? You got to stop. And the other part of it's like, that's that's not a solution, right? They're kids. They should be able to have some level of social life. They should also be able to make some stupid mistakes, like posting something that was dumb to post. Just like we all did dumb things when we were kids. And I know I was not, nobody, if I quoted The Godfather when I was a kid or quoted a rap song, nobody thought that I was involved in gangs, right? But that is the reality of what we're seeing. I don't know if that's concrete enough. I can give you examples of things we had hoped, but I think we're running out of time.
Yeah, that was good. We are about out of time. Dave, are you have any final thoughts for Jerome?
This got me thinking that I should be writing up how dangerous it is to have a cell phone. Because anybody could get a traffic stop. Anybody can get falsely accused. Or even if you did something, does that mean that the cops should know everything about the rest of your life?
I would say no.
Phones are dangerous.
Yeah,
they are.
Okay, well, this has been a really eye-opening conversation, and I want to thank Jerome Greco from the Public Defender's Office of the Legal Aid Society for joining us. Thank you, Jerome.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, this has been Community and Technology with Dave Bernstein and Stu Reed on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. Stay tuned next Wednesday for more Tech Talk. Thanks for tuning in. Good night.